And here we are for another episode of Dualistic Unity Social, the series wherein we record while we are also on Instagram, answering Instagram questions and doing Instagram related things. And so if you are joining us on Instagram, hi, glad that you could be here. Feel free to ask any questions or leave any comments, and we will do our best to get to them if we think it's appropriate to do so. Andrew.
Yeah, definitely throw some questions in there because I don't know. I have a number of ways I guess we could take today's call, but yeah, I don't really know. Just with the pronoun stuff is definitely top of mind because I just posted a clip on TikTok in response to one of the clips we had that it goes very in depth into just the issue, the conflict that identity creates. Any identity, as you cling to it, you're forced to defend it. And it's so interesting how no one wants to look at identity itself. Like, it's almost like we think there must be some identity that is it, and there's always a conflict with that because it's an illusion every single time. The idea that you're something separate from reality at all is an illusion, and all of our identities and things we identify as and the stories we tell ourselves, our idea of ourselves, cuts us off from that recognition. And so there's always going to be conflict with that because it isn't real. It is real in the experience of it, but it's not in reality. Like, it's always going to create a conflict with reality because you are reality. And if you believe that you're not, if you believe that you're a thing that you identify as, it's not what's actually happening. And so of course there's going to be conflict. And it's the same for any type of identity, whether it's gender identity or religious identity or political identity or nationalistic identity. It's all just identity. And it's fascinating that how few people are willing to look at identity itself, but it's where a lot of people derive their value, even in having the conversation about it. It's like the example you brought up yesterday with scientists recognizing that nothing is disconnected, that everything is the same base energy. But then they're like, I discovered this. And immediately they're in conflict. It's like, who discovered it? You just said everything is connected, inherently connected, and there is no division. That isn't just a perception. And yet you're the one discovering that. Who is? Exactly. So it's interesting.
It really is. Wow, you just decided to go deep already from the start. Um, there's a lot to be said there. I want to take a quick moment though, just because there is this account on TikTok. I think it's like Toon Hacks or something like that. But it's like with a little graphic for the second O, so it's just Ton Hacks. Anyway, this person has been bugging me for months. And while sometimes they're very supportive of my videos, there's always this underlying, but message me. Message me, you're ready for the next step. Message me. Now it's message me, I have a gift for you. And that kind of thing just gets weird after a while. And I just wanted to throw that out there very quickly. Like, we really appreciate support and encouragement, and we appreciate questions. We even appreciate the people who aren't very polite and leave a comment. That's great. But when I've said repeatedly, and this is what got me, is that I've said repeatedly for months, if you want to contact me, just contact me through the website. Because anybody listening, if you would like to contact us about being on the podcast or having us on a podcast, or if you just want to talk to us about something and ask us a question, we have a contact form on our website at dualistiCunity.com. It's that simple. That's really it. But on TikTok, I have to follow you. And if your content isn't something that I'm a fan of or something I want to see, I'm not going to do that. That doesn't mean you can't get in touch with me. So that's what this eventually came to was, get in touch with me. I'll send you a gift. So I ended up just blocking the person because, again, that gets weird.
Yeah, I've had some people do similar things. Like, people Venmo me saying, like, trying to get my attention and stuff. And someone was doing it to try and get a one-on-one. They're like, I want to book a call. It's like, it's right in my bio, like a direct link right there. It doesn't take very long to find it. And they've sent like 3 requests, and they keep saying like, I want to chat, I want to chat. It's like there's a way to do it. You can straight up book a call without having to do anything. And I don't know, it's interesting how they'll go to that length. Like they found my Venmo and they sent me money for it. It's like it's gonna add up to the cost of the one-on-one you're gonna end up booking anyway. So people are funny in that way. And it's like they just, I don't know, want attention, I guess, or something. But it's funny to see. And even with all the things, like everything we do, everything we sell, workshops and stuff like that, and 95% of what we do doesn't cost any money whatsoever. And the other couple percent is very little money. But if you have a certain question, if you want us to cover a certain topic, like we're available all the time. Like we do the Patreon groups all the time. We do the weekly free group chats. We do live streams all the time. Like you can ask us anything and we'll give our perspective on it. Like you can be in a Zoom call with us and we'll touch on the exact thing that you're curious about. And so we're nothing if not available for all of those conversations. And then it's always funny when people get hung up on, oh, you're taking advantage of this conversation, you're profiting off of it, blah blah blah. It's like we do so much fucking shit for free. It's unreal how many things, and keep our prices like as low as we can. So we get very little people saying things like that, oh, you're profiting off of the conversation, these topics. That's just wrong. It's like, look at all of the free things that we're doing. And you tell me how I'm supposed to pay for groceries if I'm not making some sort of money, at least in the current situation that we're existing in right now with our society.
And it is difficult to podcast as an intangible being. So we have to, keep the body going, and eating and having a place to live is a useful thing when you want to keep your body going. Another thing I want to address very quickly, because I thought this was an interesting conversation, was the idea of insecurity, because we were talking about, not wanting to classify people. Don't classify people as, being this way or that way and so on and so forth. But insecurity is a horse of a different color, let's just say. And what I mean by that is somebody was making the point like, well, if you're identifying somebody as insecure, you're identifying part of their identity. And immediately that made me uncomfortable, because you start to think about that. You're like, hold up. Insecurity actually comes from overcommitment to identity. It's not a part of your identity. It's an action you're taking regarding identity. So insecurity comes from overcommitment to identity as truth. Because if identity is truth, then what you think of yourself needs to be defended, needs to be held up, needs to be held on to, needs to be attached to, needs to be built up, can't be threatened, can't be lowered. And so with that comes insecurity. You have something to protect. You don't feel secure, which is where insecurity comes from. And so I just thought it was really interesting to point out that insecurity is not, in fact, part of your identity. It's not a personality quirk. It's something that happens to each and every person who relies on identity as a source of truth and value. It's a strategy, or rather, it's the result of a strategy that's not working. And so we all have that possibility. It's not something that's individual by any means. Insecurity is something that we're all open to, because it's always the result of overcommitting to an illusion. I just thought it was an interesting point.
Yeah, it really is a product, and it's always going to be there. Like insecurity is always going to be there as long as you are clinging to something that's creating that sort of conflict. Like it isn't that sort of quality. It's a product of everyone, and even people who don't seem insecure. There's always going to be trigger points if you're holding on to an idea of yourself. Like just harping on, because we do it all the time with Andrew Tate. He is one insecure motherfucker because he's holding on to an idea of the right way to be a man, and he couldn't possibly not be that. Like there's probably parts to him that don't align with his idea of the right way to be a man or a high value man, and so he's going to be insecure whether he shows it or not. And if not being insecure is a component of his idea of a high value man, he's going to do everything he can to not look insecure, and that's just going to create more insecurity. Like if you're holding on to an idea of what you should be or the right way to be, you're not secure with yourself, because that's not yourself. That's an idea. That's maintaining an idea of what you think you should be, and that gap between what you are and what you think you should be creates insecurity. Like that's kind of the instability is in that gap.
So you seem to be implying, when you think about what you're saying regarding needing to be a high quality man, needing to perceive yourself in a certain way in terms of your manliness and all of that, what you're essentially saying is that Andrew Tate suffers from gender dysphoria.
Exactly. And this is what we were talking about the other day, that anytime you think there's a right way to be a woman or a right way to be a man, you're suffering gender dysphoria every single time, because you're believing that there is a possible right way to be a certain gender. There's no correct way or right way to act like a man. Oh, be more ladylike. Those things don't fucking exist. They just make people more comfortable, because then they feel like they have some sense of control or certainty, and a rule book to follow and a guideline to follow. But anytime you're trying to be, be a man and wear a certain thing, or act a certain way, or talk a certain way, that is the experience of gender dysphoria, because there is no right way to be a man or to be a woman. You are that at all times. What you are is it, because that the conceptual idea of being the right way to be a man or a woman, or being more manly or more ladylike, is just a conceptual idea. That's all that it is. It doesn't really exist in reality. All it does is create conflict with reality. And so anytime you're not matching that or trying to match that, you're experiencing gender dysphoria, because you think there's a right way to be that gender. It's like it's what you are, one way or another, and there is no right way. But as we create a very, very intense conflict with our idea of what we think that is, that's when we start taking actions thinking that we don't fit. I don't fit in to what I think I should be, so I must be something else. Oh, I feel like I have this conceptual idea of what it means to be a woman. I have this conceptual idea of what it means to be a man. No matter what you're given, no matter what you're born as, if you feel at conflict with that conceptual idea that doesn't actually exist, you're going to think that you should be the other one, or maybe neither, and entirely something else. No, you're you. You're you. You don't need to be a thing more than that. You're always you. The identity that you hold on to is irrelevant. It isn't you. It's never going to be you, but it's going to create a lot of conflict with the reality that you are, which is just reality when you hold on to what you think you should be. And if it doesn't align with what you feel like you are, you're going to make drastic changes that only create more conflict with reality, only deepen into that conflict with reality.
But we forget that, right? Like we forget that because we lose the forest for the trees. Like we start thinking that the problem is one thing, and we start losing the fact that it has an undercurrent that's affecting everything. And so what I mean is that people look at, say, trans identity as something that is very different from toxic masculinity, instead of recognizing that they're the same mechanism. They're two sides of the same coin, right? It's overcommitment to identity as truth. The one side is, I'm not that identity. The other side is, I'm so that identity. Like, right? And that's all it is. It's always just in regards to the fiction of what we think we are, right? Like this idea that your biology, outside of creating different physical considerations, which I think is really all the biology thing comes down to, is that there's different physical considerations, right? Has nothing to do with how you dress, how you act, how you talk, who you hang out with, what you look at yourself in regard. It's like, if you look at yourself as somebody who should be wearing a dress, then wear a dress, and that's kind of what your point was in your video recently, is that it's just a dress. Like we could just choose a different word for it if that makes you more comfortable, but it's just fabric. It's not created with the restriction like, oh, it's coming out of the machine, it's perfect, oh my god, look at all this fabric, ah shit, It says men only on it. Like none of that happens. It's just fabric, right? And it's fabric cut in a certain configuration or pattern. None of that implies that it has to be used by a specific person. It's just that our culture is more comfortable with it. That's pretty much it. Like even just the word dress is kind of funny because everything is dress. Like when we refer to other cultures and how they dress, we refer to Japanese dress or traditional indigenous dress, right? Why? Because we're getting dressed. Like the whole point is the word itself just means clothing, which is again why that video was super funny.
Yeah, it's so funny how up in arms people get and immediately make all of these assumptions about the conversation being had, despite it not like even the trans conversation like wasn't brought up at all in that video. It's just I'm not a man wearing a woman's dress. Like those are just conceptual ideas of what it is. Yeah, there's a biological component to being a man or a woman, but that's not what I was discussing in that video. They're just labels, and we believe that labels are the truth, and we think that it must mean this if this is being said or this is being worn, or I have this idea of who can wear this and who can't wear this, and that's irrelevant. It's irrelevant to the conversation. I wanted to address.
Please tell me it's the how do you be authentic if you don't know who you are question.
Exactly.
Thank
you. Yeah. Knowing who you are, that idea that you come up with of who you are isn't who you are. And so you're always you. You're always authentically being you. It's a product of just being what you are. You're always being perfectly authentic. And all that means is not trying to be anything at all. Like anytime you're trying to be something, which if you maintain an idea, if you come up with an idea, I know what I am. That's just an idea. That's not you. It's you thinking about an idea of what you think you are. And if you try to be that, you're not being authentic. And so coming up with an idea of what you are is actually the opposite of being authentic, because now you're trying to be that. And now you're trying to fit into this. And now you're trying to be something. Being authentic is just what you are when you're not trying to be anything at all. Being yourself is just what you are when you're not trying to be anything at all. You're doing it right now in that comment. You're being yourself right there. Right now, you're listening to this or watching this, or anyone listening to it after the fact. You're always being authentic when you're not trying to be something. And technically, even when you are trying to be something, you're still being authentically trying to be something. But it's just what you are. You can't not be authentic ever. There's nothing you have to try to do to be that authentic self, because it's what you are. You can't escape that authenticity.
That said, though, it is important to recognize that while you are always yourself, you can also really get lost in the experience of being yourself, pretending you're not yourself. You can get lost in the experience of being yourself, doubting yourself, or rather doubting a fiction that is you. And so a big part of being yourself is recognizing what you're not. That's really all it is not investing in the illusion that you're not quite as often. So that way what remains is more of you, because you're always you. You're always there. You are always the here and now. There isn't a thing that you're doing that isn't you authentically doing it. It's just how lost in the narrative, the story of yourself are you getting, and how much is that changing what you do and how you perceive it, just because you're looking at it as being something it's not, right? And so what Andrew was just saying is exactly right. It really just comes down to what you are when you're not thinking about it overly much, right? That's really it. It's like when you run into somebody, you have a brief conversation, you walk away, and immediately the thought comes up, oh, did I say everything correct? And you just go, well, I don't know that. And you push it away. And then all of a sudden, what you're left with is just you, rather than you worrying about how you're doing, which is still you, but it's authentically you worrying about what you're doing. And you don't need to do that. You don't always have to be in control. You don't have to be judging your progress. You don't have to be analyzing how you're doing. Like if you don't do that, you're definitely going to screw up, that everything's going to go to crap, because I mean, you've been doing fine, whether you realize it or not. So it's a process is what I'm saying. It's not an achievement. It's a lowering of the distortion that you're carrying with you all the time. It's not a place you're going to get to where I'm always authentically me. It's just a recognition, because it's always been happening. You're not trying to get to it. You're trying to recognize why you can't see it.
Yeah, and when you start, you go through a conversation and then afterwards you start wondering, oh, how'd that go? You start judging yourself, wondering all of these things, trying to find a sense of certainty of how it went. Oh, did it go well? Did it go poorly? And we'd rather just settle upon an assumption of how it went than just recognize that we don't know. Oh, I don't know how it went. There are some parts that maybe were perceived in one way, some parts that were perceived in another way. But even that, we can't know in the immediate the impact of certain things. Like maybe someone takes one little bit away and then they have another conversation that leads to another conversation. And that ripple right there in that conversation echoes in eternity. Everything that we do echoes in eternity all the time. So we can't possibly know. We like to silo, oh, that conversation is just that conversation, and the immediate impacts that happen throughout the rest of the day are the only impacts that are ever had from it. Everything we do, everything we say, every experience that we go through continues to ripple forever. So we can't even know how a situation went, how a conversation went, how a thing went. It's impossible to adequately judge it with any degree of certainty whatsoever or any degree of accuracy whatsoever. But the alternative to judging it for without any degree of certainty is just understanding that I don't know how it went. I can't know. I cannot know how something went. No matter what it is, even if you get graded on something, even if someone explicitly says that was a dumb thing, you don't know that. Like you can't actually know what the real true impact of anything that you do is because it continues to ripple. It continues to ripple on. So we cut it off at a certain point and think, oh, how'd this go? And we try and make a judgment just to avoid that recognition that we can't know. You can never really know how you're doing. You can never actually know where your value lies, where your, other people's perception of you actually lies. You can't know those things. But we just come up with assumptions about where it does lie in order to avoid that. But you can't know. And so when it comes back to being authentic, being yourself, the less time you can spend getting caught up in judgments just to find some false certainty, the more easily you're going to be able to continue to be yourself and express yourself authentically because you're not getting caught in those judgments about yourself. And as you get caught in the judgments that you can't actually know, it's going to take your attention away from the situation that you're going through. And then you're going to continue to act less authentically because you're trying to be something based on assumptions that you've made. But being uncertain is being yourself, is being free. Uncertainty, freedom, authenticity, being yourself, they're all the same thing. And it's just when you're not thinking about what's happening, trying to come to a conclusion, trying to come to a judgment about what's happening quite as often. And then you're a little bit more free to just step into things and realize I don't know how this is going to go, and I won't know how this went even after the fact. I can't. And so you just continue to be relaxed and continue to step through things, and you keep finding out more of what you're capable of, but not find out what you are.
It's so interesting because sometimes we'll have this conversation and we'll discuss the importance of surrender, right? To recognize you don't know, to recognize you can't know, that you're not in control, and to just let go. But people tend to take that as an action. Like, oh, I'm going through stuff, I need to surrender. No, it's an ongoing practice. The only way to truly experience what you are, being yourself, being the present, whatever it is to surrender into it, because it's not something you can do. It's not something you have to achieve. It's something that you are. It's something that's always happening. It's just how much mental chatter is on top of that. And so, how do you be authentically yourself? How do you become more present? How do you become more aware? Any of these questions. And what's funny is that the answer is not satisfying to our mind. Our mind does not like the answer to this because it's one answer. Always. It's always one answer. Relax. Relax. That's what it means. Relax into that feeling of not knowing. Relax into that understanding. You're not in control. Relax into what you're already becoming, what you've been changed by every step of the way. Relax. You're already doing everything you're trying to do. Relax. The place you're trying to get is what you are. There's no way to get to it. And the only reason you want to journey is so you can avoid it, because it might not be what you'd prefer. It might not be what you idealize. It might not be what the vision in your head is, because of course it's not. What it is what you have right now, and your life changes drastically as soon as that becomes the all and everything of what you're doing, because then it's just, what can I do with this? Not, why is it this way? Why isn't it this way? Why does that person have it that way? There's none of that. It's just, this is what I am. This, here, right now. And these are the options that are open to me. And what's funny is, once you stop telling yourself what those options are, there are so many more of them.
Yeah, your idea of where you should be is irrelevant to where you are. Like, all of this unfolding is already happening. The things that you're trying to get to, trying to experience, they become more clear to you that they're already happening when you let go of the idea that something else should be happening. And so this recognition, it isn't, as he said, it's not satisfying at all, because it doesn't give a controlled answer, a controlled sense of certainty of the right way for things to be. It's like, fuck the right way, fuck the way things should be. Things are as they are. What can you do with it? And the more you relax, the more you let go of the shoulds, the more you let go of the idea of what you want things to be happening, or the way you think it should sound or look or act, the more attention you can bring to the experience that you're having. Because all of those ideas of what you should be going through or what should be happening, as opposed to what's actually happening, cut down on your ability to pay attention to the experience that you're having and make the most of it and appreciate it fully, or at least learn something from it, or at least work towards shifting it or changing it. Getting caught up in thinking you should be in another spot does fuck all to change the spot that you're in. It doesn't do anything to change that spot. It can be a recognition of, I'm going through something and I'm going to dig into this and pay attention so that I can move and shift and change. But that change is already happening too. It's just you relaxing, paying attention to the experience that you're having, that allows that change to process more and more quickly. But the change is happening, and your idea of where you think you should be is hindering that change. It's not to say that change isn't happening, but it's like, it's like when you're downloading a video and you have shitty bandwidth or shitty Wi-Fi, and it's taking, it shows up and says how long it's going to take to download. It says like 8 hours or something. You're like, oh man, that's gonna take a while, but it's still ticking. It's still moving very slowly and not making much progress. That's like when you're caught up and thinking you should be somewhere else, or life isn't fair, or you can't, like, this person has all this stuff. I wish I was here. I wish I was there. That's what's causing that to slow. As those start to drop, as you let go of the idea of where you think you should be or what you think you should be feeling relative to what you're feeling, that accelerates that. Now all of a sudden that video is downloading. It says it'll only take 4 hours, and it's accelerating. And then you let go of all of those ideas, and you're paying all of your attention to where you're at, letting go of the idea of the way you should be acting or the things you should be going through. All of a sudden it's like, it's gonna take 4 minutes to download. So it just went from 8 hours to 4 minutes, because you let go of the idea of where you think you should be, what you think you should be going through, all of those things. Because, like, that process is happening, whether you think you should be somewhere else or not. Like, the change is always happening, but we do a very, very good job at restricting the amount that is happening, and the swiftness of it happening, like how quickly it's happening. But as you bring your attention back to the experience that you're having, let go of the shoulds, let go of the ideas of the right way to live or the right spot to be in. Oh, I'm 30, I should be in this spot in my life. I'm 50, I should be in this spot in my life. That's slowing the processing. The best thing you can do to accelerate that processing, to accelerate the shifts that you want to be happening in your life, is let go of the shoulds. Let go of the ideas of where you think you should be.
There was a comment here saying that when you tell someone to be yourself, you're already judging them. And I wanted to mention, things aren't always what they appear. And what I mean is that it's not what you're saying so much as where it's coming from. There are times when talking to somebody about being themselves really does come from a recognition that they're trying to be something else. And depending on your tone, depending on where you're coming from, depending if you're trying to educate or save them, as opposed to being in a genuine, organic moment of empathy and communication, like it's a very different impact, I guess is what I'm saying. So it's not, while an apple is a red round fruit, not all red round fruits are apples, I guess is what I'm saying. So not all conversations where you're like, be yourself, are you being a condescending prick? It's important to recognize that. Like, have some faith in yourself. The words are going to find themselves. Like that's very much what Krishnamurti was saying, and that empathy has its own action. Just feel the empathy. And then whatever comes from that empathy will be informed by that empathy, and it will have a different impact. But you could use the same words from a place of ego, and all of a sudden that person's judging you and pushing you away because of where you're coming from, because of the impact that it's having, the energy and the intensity behind it, the ultimate end result that you're trying to get to. It's a very different conversation. So I just wanted to mention that very quickly. We still have like 13 minutes left, but if anybody would like to join us after this, we are having a tier 2 call on Patreon, which is an hour and a half, and it will inform our community topics episode that we're going to be recording later on this afternoon. We haven't done this in about a month. Today's community topics episode is about infidelity. So that's going to be a really interesting topic. The second runner-up was aphantasia. We're getting so close. I know one of the members of our community has been really, really trying to get that one to the top of the list for months and months and months. And so I'm very excited that we're getting there. But if you would like to join us on Patreon after this, we have a 7-day free trial available. I'm going to throw the QR code on the screen. You can join us up to 5 days a week for our group chats. We have a growing community. We have discounts on our retreats. We still have 2 tickets left for our July 27th retreat in Vancouver, Canada. If you would like to join Andrew and myself for a couple of days of relaxing, being vulnerable around other people working on the same kind of journey, as well as just being open to communication, smoking some weed, going for a swim in the ocean, hopefully going for a walk in the wilderness. It's going to be a great time. And it really is an opportunity for you to just take all the change that you've been working through up until now and have the space to apply it, to recognize exactly how much you've learned, because you're not getting pushed and pulled by the people around you who maybe are still trying to self-validate or are pushing and pulling you without recognizing they are. It's a nice way to get that space to hang with cool people and then to go back to your life feeling refreshed.
Yeah, and if anyone on the stream right now or on Instagram has any questions, they want to come to the Vancouver retreat, there's the link right there. Feel free to shoot me a DM and ask me if you got any questions. Happy to answer them. We do have massive discounts on Patreon, so if you want to go to a retreat, you might as well get on Patreon to get those discounts, because they're more than the monthly cost of it. They're more than a couple monthly costs of being on Patreon, depending on the tier. So well worth that to save some money on the retreats. But what was the other thing? With that community topics. I don't want to get into it too much, but I'm very curious where that one goes. I don't necessarily have a ton of experience with that, but it'll be interesting just to discuss maybe where some of that comes from. But yeah, we're gonna save that for the episode.
Oh, there's lots and for sure. Well, it's so nice. The community topics are so much fun because we don't know what the answer is going to be, like what the topic's going to be, until pretty much that morning or late the night before. And so we don't really have time to like do prep. It really is just, what we understand, and then a couple of ideas as we're getting ready for the episode. Because that's what I'll tend to do, is I'll do a flurry of like, that's interesting, and I'll go and look this way, and oh wow, that's interesting, and I'll go and look that way. Like I think my favorite so far was our community topics episode on the effects of music on humanity, which is really funny because I really didn't think I'd enjoy recording that episode at all. But all of a sudden, we had like a half hour to do some research. A couple of things dawned on me, and I went and looked some stuff up. And that conversation ended up being really, really interesting, talking about the influences of music, how it's used against us in some ways, how it can be used to benefit us, the effect that it has on late stage Alzheimer's, where it impacts the brain. There was a lot in that episode. And then, if anybody would like to check it out, that's a community topics episode. I think it's like 38 or 39. But yeah, you can find it, The Effect of Music on Humanity. Awesome episode. A lot of fun to record.
Yeah, I think that was a great reminder for both of us. Fuck our expectations, basically, because we were both kind of just like, we got to talk about this, and then it ended up being a great conversation. So that's important. Just expectations are such a funny thing. Just how unnecessary they are in our lives. Like, there's a difference between some degree of prep or setting boundaries and expectations, which we also have a community topics on boundaries, right? I think it's like unity and boundaries or something that we go into that in depth, another community topics episode, because boundaries are something, it's a topic that comes up pretty often with like, oh, if you recognize that reality is you and everything is you and blah blah blah, like why even set any boundaries if you're always just interacting with yourself? And it's important to realize that with that recognition, there doesn't come any rules. There's not a right or a wrong way. Like setting boundaries can be a component of being everything as much as letting go of those boundaries. And there's a sensitivity that allows you to realize when one is more applicable than the other, but there's not a right way to do anything. And so there's not an answer. And this is one of the toughest things that people I don't know, kind of butt up against in this conversation is there isn't a rule book, there isn't a manual, there isn't a right way to live. Everything is on the table, and it just depends on your sensitivity and awareness to the situation that you're going through that provides the correct answer in the moment or the closest thing to the correct answer in the moment. And so setting boundaries or not setting boundaries comes down to you and how sensitive you are to the experience, because there's certain situations where you set a boundary that might be too extreme and it's coming from your own sort of fear or avoidance of something, and then there's other times where you set a boundary because it's the most reasonable thing to do because you've gone through an experience enough times and you're like, all right, I'm going to set a boundary right here. And then some smart ass on social media just in this conversation will be like, well, what are you afraid of setting that boundary? It's not a fear thing. It's just a recognition of certain behavior. And then I'm going to put this boundary up because again, there's not a right or a wrong way to live. But it's interesting how in this conversation, people will settle upon one side or the other and think like, oh no, this is the right way. And it starts to get uncomfortable. And the more you realize, oh, there really isn't a right way. There's no right way to look at things. There's no right way to have this experience. Like it's all on the table, all variations. And there's so many different things you can learn from every variation and every point of view and every perspective, and digging in to things and finding out what it is and taking those learnings and lessons with you. And that's why it's so important to not avoid certain things just because someone else says there may be consequences to that thing. It's like you got to find out or you're never going to know. And how much sensitivity you have going into it and how much attention you're paying to it will provide you with the most amount of lessons and allow the consequences of whatever you're going through to not be as extreme as they would be if you weren't paying as much attention. And so it's just stepping into things with that as much attention as you can being paid, letting go of your expectations of what you think it should be, that allows you to actually see what it is, because the expectations always distort the experience as well. And they kind of take a lot of the enjoyment out of the experience. You have really high expectations of something. Oh, this is going to change my life. This is going to be the best thing ever. This is going to be the best experience ever. And even if it's a really amazing experience, but it doesn't quite meet those expectations, there's like a gap which creates a disappointment. And it's like, oh God, that was such a great experience that you just kind of fucked because you had these massive expectations of it and they didn't quite meet those. It's like the expectations aren't necessary. They're not really relevant to how the situation is going to play out.
But then I just have to settle for the experience. And I don't know how that's going to play out. So I want to have a sense of control. So I'm going to have expectations. And it's really interesting how we do that. And we have expectations because we have no faith in ourselves. That is the entire reason that we have expectations, because if I know what's happening, I don't have to worry about whether or not I can cope with it. That's it. I don't think that I can adapt to whatever it is that happens. And so my brain is creating fictions to make me feel better about what I'm walking into. That's it. And it's there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a recognition that it's happening. That's really all it is. That's always what it comes down to. And I said this in Discover Transcendence. And if anybody's wondering, you can find that on YouTube. I'll throw a link up here. Just the fact that our brain does things that it does for the sake of keeping our biology, our organism alive, but we don't recognize that it does those things. And so we don't realize how much we're influenced by them. And that's really it. It's just the fact that our brain is trying to keep our body alive until we become aware enough to do that ourselves. Right? So it does it in the most simplistic way. Identify, establish false certainty, and value through comparison. It's like, who am I? How much am I worth? And how am I doing? Oh, look at all these people and my assumptions of them. That must be the way to measure that. And we just take it at face value when it's not. That's pretty much it. We have 3 minutes left here, so we're going to be going on to Patreon very shortly. There was a question, and I'm not going to address it this time around because it's a really interesting question, and frankly, 2.5 minutes does not do it justice. Kind of a random question, but I just finished an episode about how believing in God is similar to believing in Santa, and I was wondering if you, Ray, ever had your daughter believe in Santa when she was younger. Now that's a good question because there's a lot of nuance there. Did I entertain the illusion? And if I did entertain the illusion, for how long and why? Was there any value in it? And why did I eventually, if I did do that, introduce the fact that it was an illusion? How long did it take to get to the point where you level with somebody as they develop enough to ask genuine questions that there is in fact an illusion? And why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you just level with a kid about what the reality is? What's the vested interest for you as a parent? What are you trying to maintain in terms of like false certainty or in terms of tradition, things that happened to you as a child without thinking about the consequence, without thinking about how it affected you in terms of your emotions? There's so many good questions here. It really is. It's a fantastic question. And so I'm not going to answer it at all. But I encourage you, person who left that question, to join us again. Dualistic Unity Raw, which we record 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, Sunday and Monday morning. Join us in there. Ask this question again because it's fantastic. There's a lot of nuance to it, and I would love to answer it. I just don't have the time right now. Or you can join us on Patreon.
Yeah, I was gonna say definitely hop on Patreon and because I'm pretty sure we actually talked about that yesterday, right? I think that was in one of the groups, was actually that exact discussion about Santa and beliefs and children and it's all a component of, and again, not going to dig too deeply because we got probably less than a minute left, but it's a component of ego development. And I think that's a process that people don't fully recognize. It's not this black and white thing of, oh, identity should be something that happens or shouldn't be something that happens. It's always happening to a degree. It's just how heavily you're invested in it. And there's a process of building it, but then recognizing that it's not the truth. So then you can utilize it as the tool that it is, without taking it so overly seriously that you experience a fuckload of consequences because of how heavily invested you are in that identity. So gonna leave it there because we're wrapping this up and we'll be on Patreon in 15 minutes, but appreciate everyone for tuning in to this episode of Dualistic Unity Social, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
See you soon, everyone.